when the U.S. Constitution was written, it right away became a boilerplate for all sorts of constitutions, especially in Latin America. Those in Western Europe and elsewhere, for the most part, went their own way. So the French Constitution of 1791 and the Polish Constitution of that same year there was some resemblance to the U.S. document, but they certainly weren't using it as a template. There's a lot of domestic influence as well. Whereas if you look at Latin America and the independence movements in the 1820s or so, those states very quickly had to adopt a constitution. It's no surprise that they looked north and took the U.S. Constitution as their model. And if you look at the content, they're incredibly similar, right down to the name of things. And so, some of the big federal democracies or federal states in Latin America, like Mexico, Venezuela, and Brazil, even took the name. So Brazil, up until 1950 or so, was calling itself the United States of Brazil, and the same thing with the first Mexican Constitution. So, they took everything, including the name, and that, includes some of the names of offices and other things as well. So one of the interesting aspects of the deliberations in the U.S. Constitutional Assembly in Philadelphia was that they were sort of uncertain about what to call things, and sort of for the head of state, the leading candidate for much of the session was governor, and that's what, certainly the heads of colonies, the executives in the colonies were called. And there was a great quote from John Adams saying, after somebody had suggested the word president, he says, that's just really sort of demeaning. A president is something that's, somebody who's the head of a cricket club, or what else did he say, a firehouse or something like that. And, that's just not fitting for the head of state of the United States. And, but, people in that assembly had gotten used to calling George Washington the president of the Constitutional Assembly, and so it was natural to sort of lean towards using the word president. And that, if you look at constitutions that have come since, for at least those who have a sort of a single executive system, they all call their head of state the president. So another thing, and you could run down the list from all these discrete components to sort of little things like the qualifications, the age qualifications for certain offices. And so it's somewhat arbitrary that the U.S. decided that somebody had to be 35 to be president. But yet every single constitution, for the most part, in Latin America in the 1800s made that same decision. And so the modal choice among all these constitutions is 35 in terms of the qualifications for age for head of state. And, there are a few other ages in there that crop up. You see some choosing 30, some choosing 40, which in some sense are more natural, but 35 has them all by a margin of 3 to 1. And so you can do the same thing and go down, term length, and for both houses of the legislature, and term length for president, and that sort of thing. And you see that constitutions in Latin America especially adopting those somewhat arbitrary standards. And so that's the most obvious thing, but you see it with more structural things like the decision, somewhat strange decision in some ways, to adopt a two-chambered legislature. Pretty much all legislatures in Latin America are bicameral, and in many ways that's a very suboptimal choice. It just makes it much harder to pass legislation, and there's a lot of confusion about the division of labor between the two chambers and who's doing what, and but yet the U.S. Constitution saw fit to do that, and many others followed it.